What's going on, Workforce? Brian here.
Chris here.
And today we're talking about the gear treadmill, especially as it relates to Final Fantasy XIV. But this is a generalized topic. You can apply these thoughts to pretty much any game nowadays. Like Destiny is notorious for it. It's one of the reasons why I think it's always good to kind of step away and take breaks because, like in a treadmill, it gets easy. But let's go ahead and talk about it, Chris. Obviously, you've been doing a lot of 14. You're experiencing like getting caught up in the and leveling. You also doing World of Warcraft. What are your thoughts on the gear treadmill? Like it, love it. What would you change about it?
So first, I define it for anybody that's maybe in their first MMO now, or has always been in one MMO, and so they're not separating what is content and what we're calling the treadmill. And so basically what ends up happening in any MMO is to keep you excited on the between times. You get a big chunk at the beginning of the expansion, then you get these chunks of story and stuff, is they give you a set of repeatable things, whether that's running dungeons, running raids, and the purpose of them is typically to reward you with something that will slowly increase the power of your character, but only so that you can get to the next round of PvE content that will be now tuned to the new eye level. So you're effectively back where you started, and now you're grinding towards the next one. So you get better gear to go into new content, you go into new content to get better gear, and you just run around and around. And usually there's catch-up mechanics where you can kind of walk on your treadmill and it just hands you content, but you're never at the top of the curve. Or you can sprint on that treadmill and you can be at the very cutting edge, always doing the most DPS, the most healing, able to pull the biggest pulls. But ultimately, you're on a treadmill. You'll never reach that far wall. The content will always expire, and then you will be expected to either walk or run through the next patch cycle. It never, ever ends. And I would say, like, when you first get into MMOs, it's really easy to fall into because you immediately jump from your story to what to do next. And getting an initial set of gear is one of the requirements to get into current content. And then you get to your first patch cycle and they're like, hey, there's some even more new gear. And you're like, great. And so it feels really good. It is also one of the greatest sources of fatigue when you're in the same game for patch after patch, year after year, expansion after expansion.
So there's a couple of ways that we can obviously take this video, because in terms of advice, how do we deal with that fatigue? How do you protect yourself from that kind of burnout? That's typically the gear treadmill, in my mind, and this could be just my own biased opinion, tends to be what ends up leading to more burnout as opposed to joy. Now, that's not always the case. I think the best and first, from just a piece of advice, is knowing you're on a treadmill in that regards, a gear treadmill, is the first step. Because when I look at how I approached Shadowbringers versus how I've approached previous expansions, especially ARR, and especially Heavensward, and then by Stormblood, I was like, wait a minute, I've done this before. And then Shadowbringers, I said, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. I said, I'll wait. And so it's like, if
just
I
hit
get
the down arrow, you just slow it down a little.
Just slow it down.
You can always speed it back up.
Well, and that's the point. It's like, when is the right opportunity when you're on a treadmill to go and do that sprint? Like, it's almost, in my mind, it ended up becoming more of an efficiency equation. And I ended up concluding the 0.4 patch, because the 0.4 patch is when the gear theoretically reaches its ceiling outside of a few little catch-up mechanics they add in 0.5. But I know that not until the expansion and really getting into that next mode does it really, like, where do you get the most bang for your buck, in my opinion. And so that's one aspect of it. But there's always the question, and I'd like to ask you this question before we kind of go down further this rabbit hole, is what's the risk of why not just have the stuff have a cap for the expansion, and whenever you hit that cap and everything is tuned to that? Imagine, like, what's the risk of them launching 6.0 and having the gear tuned at whatever the 0.4 patch would end up being, and then as you push forward, what's that risk to the player or to the game itself?
Boredom, the other form of burnout. Having new gear gives you a new challenge. There's a new thing to acquire. Otherwise, once you get it, you're kind of done. Now, my understanding as I'm preparing to go into Guild Wars 2 is that they have lateral gear progression, and so that I'm looking forward to trying something else. But within WoW and 14, and you mentioned Destiny, there's a very traditional formula of newer is better. And so you just replace gear, and whatever your newest piece of gear is from the hardest thing you've run is your best. And, you know, sometimes there's stat priority and stuff that causes some optimization to have, but that's all part of it. You're always looking for that newest, shiniest thing. And since gear never really expires, you can repair it an infinite number of times. That's what allows gear to degrade, is they just degrades naturally over time, not overuse. That's the counter, right? If you just gave people the best gear, you're in a single player game, and that's it. And you get to the end. We see that in ARPGs. And so what they end up having to do is you have to do seasonal content. You have to give people a reason to hit reset on the ladder or to acquire something different. You have to give them a different reason to keep playing. Otherwise, we would just hit 6.0 hard, and then we would come back for a week at the beginning of every patch and be done. And we would have 15 weeks of downtime after 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, and 0.5. You would just have months of nothing to do. I will say that your other question was when do you sprint? And I think that depends on your goals. So if we keep with the treadmill metaphor, when you train on a treadmill, while you don't gain any distance, while your pedometer effectively reflects nothing, thank goodness these things have gotten smart enough you can plug that data in so you can feel like you score your health points on whatever app you use to track that. But like, if you just run on that, you never actually cover distance, but you do get fitter. You do build up your VO2 max, you do build up your leg strength. And so if you want to be better at a game mechanically, if you want to feel like you're playing a class optimally, the best way to do that is to do the hardest content. And to do the hardest content, you have to have the best gear. You'll never get the best parse without the best gear, no matter how good you play. And so you have to equip yourself for success. And so when you're trying to improve, you have to sprint.
Right. Assuming on that, just to clarify though, the best parse, best gear, like assuming that you're also playing optimally in that regards, because if a high performing player with low gear could outperform a poor performing player with good gear. Gear is a difference maker, but it isn't the key difference maker, in my opinion, especially as it relates to Final Fantasy XIV.
And you might be able to out sprint me on a treadmill, even though if I train every single day and you don't, you may be able to dial it up higher. But it's going to take a lot less work for me to just pass you. So the fitter person, the person who's been hitting it every day, your brother rides his exercise bike every day, 5 to 6 days a week. He takes his rest days. He takes those seriously, does his stretches. You're right. Maybe you or I could outride him, but afterwards we're going to be sore. Our chest is going to hurt. We're going to have trouble catching our breath. And so like, can you outperform somebody? Maybe. But odds are the person in the process of acquiring gear maybe has had a chance to learn some things you haven't. And that's assuming that somebody wants to be able to perform optimally. There are plenty of people who define their fun by other metrics. You and I have gotten into huge conversations about parsers recently, and it's just a way for us to define fun. I'm not saying that somebody else has to see optimally as more fun. Some people see optimization as a problem to solve. It's a challenge. Just like people who go to the weight room and they want to try to lift more weight, or people who, enter competitions for painting miniatures, or people who go to trivia night. It's not about moving the needle forward in a meaningful way. It's about setting a challenge in an atmosphere other than work or school where everything has to be so serious. And if we fail, it's no big deal. And we can just afford to swing for the fences. It's just nice.
Yeah.
And games can be that.
So to be a little bit of a negative Nancy in this regards, because at the core of it, like the gear treadmill can offer some positives, right? It gives you a new challenge to chase and more. And I think from my perspective, sometimes in seeing the treadmill and finding the optimal time, it just tends to be like, man, I wish that there was a better solution. Is there a better solution out there that we have found within gaming at the moment that we could compare? Like, I think, and to clarify real quickly, especially as it relates to Final Fantasy XIV, there are definitely other systems out there. Sure. To take those systems and try to fit them in 14, I don't think would work without an insane amount of overhaul, without an insane investment on Square Enix's perspective. So I'm not necessarily calling for that kind of change, but I'm just kind of, for the sake of discussion, like what other systems out there have we seen that we find enjoyable in that regards? Is there anything that stands out to you?
First of all, games like 14 makes this system incredibly optional. So if you don't like it, you don't have to do it, which means right from the get-go, it is an opt-in solution. And so right from the get-go, you are choosing to try to get something higher eye level sooner than when it becomes easy, or even sooner than when it becomes irrelevant. There is a point where it goes from being hard to get to easy to get, and there's a point where it goes from easy to get to, so right from the get-go. Second of all, if it is optional, people are like, well, yeah, but I want to have something to do. There are other systems in the game. There are going in back and farming old things for mounts there, and those are permanent unlocks. You get those forever. So no matter how long you're going to play the game, if you only have 1 hour this week and you're not going to play much this patch cycle, don't worry about maxing out your eye level. Go unlock a mount that you'll get to have forever and ever and ever, right? If that's going to give you a more rewarding feeling. I know that you've spent an immense amount of hours this expansion leveling up all of your jobs. You have every single job at cap in Final Fantasy XIV, all of them. You just did that, and that's a thing you have, and you get to keep that. And going into the next expansion, you start at whatever, you know, you're 10 levels from cap on all your jobs, which is a very attainable goal, as opposed to when you started and it was, you know, somebody who starts the game today, they're all at 1. You're like, oh my gosh, how would I get there? Well, every single time you gain a level, that's forever. That's what my brothers get as a huge kick out of painting painting miniatures, is that every time they paint a miniature, it's painted forever. So no matter how big your collection needs to get, once painted, always painted. That's yours. And so I think right from the get-go, you have to make the system optional, which I think Final Fantasy does quite well. It more than caters to casuals. If anything, it praises casuals. So I would say do that first. Second of all, have more lateral upgrades, so that once you're there, you have more ways to get there. You know, can we get there through crafting? Can we get there through, and I think a lot of games do that as a form of pyramid, where like at the beginning, most forms of content can grant you that eye level, and then up to here, it's like, hey, most forms of semi-challenging, most forms of really challenging, okay, we only have so much content that's really, really challenging, and that's what's at the pinnacle. And somewhere in there, some games, that's just it doesn't get more challenging, but we're just going to make you grind it because we're trying to, that is there to satisfy a set of people that is so small that you're talking about people who can play optimally for dozens of hours on end, and it's just hard to satisfy that group of people, so they can only afford to put 1 or 2 types of gear in for them. Cosmetics is one, cosmetics acts is one, and then from there you could do a paragon system. The problem with a paragon system from Diablo or whatever you want to call it, a post level cap system, some games have it, is if it has any relevance, a single point of relevance in battle content, it's no longer optional.
Right, and that's the risk. And so that's where it's like you got to have something that is content specific, like you know, in the regards of a way of where we have Heaven on High, Palace of the Dead. Recently, if you guys haven't seen, Yoshi P was talking about how you know, they're looking at trying to get that back on the schedule, so for the next expansion we can see a return of that style of content. I think that would be overall a big plus. One of the things that I've been actually having a lot of fun with the game in doing is that when you and I are doing duos of that, trying to push ourselves, finding that challenge, trying to get better in that challenge in the moment, and then wishing kind of like, man, I wish I had my level 80 skills, because that would make my approach so much different in this regards. So I think that is essentially where, like, yeah, I think one of the core aspects that would help offset any kind of burnout from the gear treadmill is to have a little bit more of that lateral and horizontal, but it's got to be something either that ties into a specific style of content, or it's just completely optional and just various like rewards, like you said, because that would be, as soon as, and I'd be fine with like what I would say merit point for the Final Fantasy XI players playing 14, but with that kind of system, I'd be fine if there was power associated with it, but it only existed in Bozja, it only existed in Eureka, it only existed in Mythic Plus, it only exists in a certain piece of content. Therefore, you can keep the Savage and the Ultimate tier as kind of the pinnacle style of content that people strive to do, but not like it does. You don't have to go gain 1,000 merit points just to be able to start participating in Savage content, because otherwise then it becomes required, and then that becomes another gate that players are going to feel like, hey, congratulations on just hitting cap, you've got 1,000 hours more that you need to go before we were going to even talk to you. You know, we
see glimpses of what you're describing, right? So we see the hunt system offering faster mount speed in zones. You know, WoW having resilient stats through various PvP seasons, which has plenty of flaws with it, so I'm not praising it as a perfect solution.
Yeah.
But saying, hey, PvP gear when within PvP has some extra benefits. The new Bojin gear offering haste when you're inside the zone. The actions, the lost actions, and as you level and metal and all of that are these systems that reward you for putting time into a system that ultimately itself is isolated and contained. And so even if you become brokenly powerful, side systems, things such as Blue Mage, things such as the Chocobo system, pet battling in WoW, Triple Triad, there are these systems where you can become more powerful and it doesn't affect battle content. What I'd like to see is a bridge between the truly optional, right? I've gone out and I've caught every rare fish in the game, and the battle content, which I agree should be sacred. If we want to have world first race, if we want to see who the players who can put out the most damage are, if we want to give them a reward for being able to clear damage checks that require that. To clear Savage week 1 is very different than people that are clearing it in week 10. That is a totally different piece of content when they're clearing it under leveled, and they have 1 week's lockout worth of loot, or in some cases no loot. That is another level of play, and I love keeping that for them. It's a great thing for the community to rally behind, but not have to take part in. It'd be nice to have something in between. It'd be nice to have something that rewards the people, and I think that's what Relic is meant to be. Is something for us to change our time and trade for gear and get a really cool cosmetic along the way. But the problem is the Relic expires.
Yeah.
And what I want is something that doesn't expire. I want something that is a permanent unlock that allows me to, because I capped every single beast tribe in an expansion, all of my retainers get 1 more page of slots or can list 1 more thing on the market board. Something that just isn't big enough to truly be game breaking when it actually gets down to it. I know people like to focus on things like, well, 1 extra slot or the houses get garden plots, but in the big scheme of the game, they really are 1% at most. I would love to see things like cheaper teleports, a % chance that when you self-repair, you don't consume the dark material
right?
Which is already worthless. Like just something where it's like, hey, I traded in 5,000 hours and they gave me a $10 bill. And it's like, I don't know that you won there, but I'm happy for you. Like you're excited, I'm excited. And so I think it'd just be nice to have kind of a consolation prize at the end of some of this.
Absolutely. Well, that actually kind of leads me into like another video topic, and that would be essentially what would we do and add to relics, and we're not going to discuss it here. You're going to have to come back tomorrow for that topic, so please tune in. Be sure to subscribe, hit the like, share button, all the social media stuff. If you already made it here in this video, you're pretty much a legend anyway, so congratulations, you wonderful, wonderful person. But yeah, let's talk about that like next, because like I want to dive into that aspect, because when we talk about that, like what would we want other than glamour? Because that's the thing I'm struggling with really, really hard right now, is that trying to get through the Crystal Tower step, knowing that here in 6 months, what the hell, like what is this for? So tune in tomorrow for our relic and what we would do to improve it discussion. Chris, you got any final thoughts on this one before we wrap up?
No, I do want to say thanks for recording this after my first WoW stream, and it was really fun to get to hang out. I know many of you aren't, maybe you only have time for one MMO. I get that. And so it's been really fun that I'll be playing WoW and Guild Wars alternating every other Friday through the month of March, and I really appreciate everybody coming and hanging out. So next week will be my first time playing Guild Wars 2.
Absolutely, and I've been having a hell of a great time with Outriders. If you guys are following over on Ginger Prime, go check that out. Go follow Gaming Kinda for more of his discussions. He's got a couple of, I think, really cool videos I'm excited to watch this week, so hopefully you guys enjoy those. But for Work to Game, my name is Brian.
My name's Chris.
Thanks so much for watching it, and we'll see you soon.
Take care.